In August of this year, we marked the 125th anniversary of the very first Zionist Congress in Basel, Switzerland. 208 delegates gathered there in 1897 with a dream. 208 delegates. And these delegates came from many different countries. They came from many different backgrounds, occupations. They had different levels of religious observance, different levels of education. It's a diverse group. And under the leadership of Theodor Herzl, they shared his dream that one day there would be the rebirth of a Jewish homeland. There'd be a modern political state where the Jewish people would have the right to self-determination, where they would be free from hatred, from persecution. A few days after that first conference, Herzl wrote in his diary, "Were I to sum up the Basel Congress in a word, which I shall guard against pronouncing publicly, it would be this. At Basel, I founded the Jewish state. If I said this out loud today, I would be greeted by universal laughter. In 5 years, perhaps, and certainly in 50 years, everyone will perceive it." He had confidence. But just about 50 years later, in 1948, his dream became a reality. And the reality, though, is today that dream is still incomplete. The Jewish state, the homeland of our people, exists, but the dream of living there in peace and security is yet to be fully realized. Today, perhaps more than ever, the question about Israel's very right to exist is called into question. There are many threats that we face as Jews. Anti-Semitism is on the rise all around the world. Here in Canada, hate crimes against the Jewish people rose 47% last year in 2021 from the year before. We see hatred rising on the right from bigots and neo-Nazis. I'm not sure if their numbers are increasing and growing or they simply feel more emboldened in the world that we live in today, in our society, to openly express their views. They remind me why it is that we need a Jewish state. A place where our people can find safe refuge if ever it is needed. After all, the ashes of our brothers and sisters, our parents and children, rose up from the Nazis' crematoriums. The nations of the world were of little help. Enlightened democracies responded. We came asking to enter, pleading for safety. None is too many. But the extremists on the right, as scary as they are, they're not what I fear the most. The man storming the United States Capitol building with a shirt that says on it, "Camp Auschwitz," he looks every bit as crazy. He is condemned nearly unanimously for what he is. He wears it on his sleeve. He's a bigot, an extremist, a threat to the values our society holds dear. But the threat that I know concerns many of us are those who call for the destruction of Israel, those who seek to delegitimize the Jewish state, because they do it with a sense of moral authority. They do it as professors in our universities. They print it in our newspapers. They preach it on primetime. They speak it in our halls, in our bodies of democracy. Some of them are our elected leaders. It's those who claim that liberal values and Zionism are at odds with each other. The growing voices that reject the very existence of a Jewish homeland. They're the ones that scare me the most. Because some of them are the voices that are shaping the next generation, not just of citizens in the world, but of the Jewish community. Some of them are rabbis or Jewish educators. Anti-Zionism, you've probably heard this sermon before many times. It's the new anti-Semitism. The difference is that the former is politically correct in our world today to express. Voices that equate Zionism with apartheid, with colonialism, with fascism. These voices are growing at an exponential rate. But remember how we started. 208 delegates from a variety of countries, variety of backgrounds. They shared one dream, a Jewish homeland. But they had many different ideas of what that would look like. We often paint Zionism today with one brush. You're for it or you're against it. But the truth is, what it means to be a Zionist is many different things. But the fundamental aspect is the belief in the Jewish right to self-determination in our homeland. Yom Kippur is about many different things, but confession is the heart of it, the main part of our service. Al chet shechatanu, for the sin we have committed by, and we insert the blank, whatever it is, hardening our hearts, speaking slander, lying, being stubborn, being envious, being arrogant. There are many acts on the list that we recite from our Maksurim. Some of them are sins we may have personally committed. Some of them are sins we might not have done personally, but others have in our community, in the world at large. Some of the sins we bear responsibility for indirectly, if not directly. But tonight I want to speak about a different sin, one that I myself have to confess, and one that isn't listed in our Maksor. Al chet shechatati, for the sin I committed through omission. Not the act that I did, but the act that I didn't do. And with that, I want to back up a bit more to set the stage. In the spring of 2021, there was a rise of violence in Israel. Not that things there are ever completely peaceful. But in April and May that year, tensions erupted into violence. Protests turned into riots. Israeli police responded. Hamas, in turn, began sending a barrage of rockets into Israel. Israel responded with airstrikes, striking targets in Gaza and elsewhere. But what was different is the world that we live in today. We live in a new era where wars are tweeted, where videos are posted on social media. Violence and fights that once seemed very far away and distant now follow us in our pockets. And perhaps that's why the response felt different to me that past year. Everywhere I looked on social media, I saw extremes. I saw pictures of the aftermath of an Israeli airstrike, pictures of the brutality, as they proclaimed, of Israeli police putting down riots. Or on the other side, the same tactics. Just a meme, just an image, something taken out of context. Terrorists using neighborhoods and schools, civilians, as a place to shoot their weapons and their rockets, using children as shields. Or videos of Israeli children running for bomb shelters in the seconds they had when the red alert siren would go off. There was something that felt different that year. Not that the violence and the tensions was anything new, but the way the world responded to it. The complete absolutism that I saw when I looked at my social media feed, when I looked at the news. The certainty that each side had they were entirely right. I don't know about you, but I found myself feeling incredibly pessimistic at that time. It was difficult for me to imagine a future where there might be peace, a future where Israelis and Palestinians could live together, where the animosity that went back and forth might be replaced with relationships, with community, with connection. But then I got invited to a new app that year by a colleague of mine, a classmate, an app called Clubhouse. I'd never heard of it before. I haven't really used it much since then. But what it is it's a social media platform more or less, except you don't post pictures, you don't post videos, you don't post text. You talk. You talk in live, in real time. You listen to conversations or you participate in them. And there are different rooms on different subjects, and one of them that was created in the middle of all of that violence, all of that tension, all of that hatred, was a room titled Meet Israelis and Palestinians. And 24 hours a day, for several weeks, it was just that. Israelis and Palestinians talking to each other, while hundreds, if not thousands of people like myself listened. And they shared stories with each other, people from all over the world listening. They shared their experiences of the violence and the conflict that's defined more than half a century. 24 hours a day. Sometimes I'd log in and a few hundred people would be on, sometimes over 1,000. And most people like myself listened for hours. I know from news articles that there were over 100,000 different people that sat in on those conversations. And it was amazing for me to hear the stories and the perspectives of people who were on opposite sides, talking thoughtfully, responding to what the other one had to say. One of the Palestinian speakers really got to me. She was about my age. She lived in California. She went to the University of California at Berkeley, which is where my brother went. It's about an hour drive from the university that I attended. I think perhaps it was all of the similarities that I imagine perhaps maybe we had been in the same restaurants or the same coffee shops when I spent time in visiting in Berkeley, that her story was particularly impactful to me. She was born in Gaza and lived there as a child. She spoke about the checkpoints, the blockade, the airstrikes, how they impacted her and her family. She shared experiences that I really can't imagine, because while we had some things in common, so much of her life, so much of her, what made her, her story, was incredibly foreign to me. But after listening to her talk a few times in the group, I reached out to her. I asked if she'd be willing to have a conversation with me on the phone because I wanted to ask her some questions. We connected and we talked. It was a good conversation. It was one of those moments that doesn't happen very often today. Speaking with someone with whom we disagree and actually hearing what they have to say. Feeling like they took the time to listen to what I had to say. Not shouting at each other, but responding to each other. She asked me why I was a Zionist. Guess to her I didn't seem like such a bad guy. So she wanted to know. Because I asked her then, what did Zionism mean to her? What did she understand that to be when someone claims to be a Zionist? And she told me that a Zionist is someone who wanted to claim all of the land that was ancient Israel, because the Torah says it belongs to us. Someone who says that God gave it to the Jewish people, and no matter who's sitting there, who's living there now, it's ours. Someone who wanted to make sure that every inch of what was historically Israel was under Jewish control, kicking out Palestinians from their homes, their farms, because that was God's plan. So I told her a bit about Zionism as I understood it, about the different visions of those who gathered there in Basel, their beliefs, their ideas. I told her what Zionism means to me, that while there are extremists, fundamentalists, fringe members of the settler and other nationalist movements who do believe in the Zionism she understood it to mean. That's not most Jews. That's not most people. That's not what I mean by it. That's not what I imagine most of you in this community mean by it. Then I asked her about an expression that I heard too often in university, chanted at protests, an expression that always makes a chill run through my body. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. I asked her about it. Did she say it? Yes. How could you say that? You seem like a nice person. I don't think you want my destruction. What does that mean to you when you say that? She wanted to know what I thought it meant. So I told her. After millennia of Jews being persecuted, every place we went to, every place we've settled, it was clear to me what that expression meant. After 6 million men, women, and children were systematically and brutally murdered by the Nazis, it was clear to me what that meant, from the river to the sea. It was a call, not just for us to be out of the land, but for our destruction. So she told me what it meant to her. It meant that one day she and other Palestinians like herself could walk freely throughout all the land of Israel. That they could go and travel the country without checkpoints and guards. That they could live in any part of the land just as their parents and grandparents had. For her, it wasn't a chant that the Jewish people wouldn't be there as well, but that Jews and Palestinians could live together in peace. She recognized, acknowledged that there are some who chant that and mean what I hear. But when she says that, when her friends say that, that's not at all what they mean. The same way, the Zionism that scares her, it's not the Zionism that many of us subscribe to and believe in. I really found that conversation invigorating. It was unexpected to me that we'd be able to talk about these complex issues, things we disagree with, but listen to each other, communicate with each other. And I walked away with a new sense of optimism that I didn't previously have about where we might go in the future. I asked her if she'd be willing to have a public conversation with me. We'd do something on Zoom, we'd put it up on YouTube. So I did so many interviews and programs for my community and the synagogue during the pandemic. She agreed. But then I chickened out. I went back to the real world, where this conflict and every other conflict and debate in our society today is zero-sum, all or nothing. We live in a world where headlines are all that matter. Nobody reads the full story. I was getting ready to go on the job search, and I was afraid. Maybe by doing a program like this, I'll be labeled as anti-Zionist. Maybe I'll be condemned by rabbis and their sermons just the same way I've condemned other rabbis and others in my own sermons. I chickened out. And I look around today at our society and I see all of the divisions in our communities. Political debate has become a shouting match of one side versus the other. The middle ground seems to have entirely disappeared. Nuance has vanished from our conversations. It's easy to blame the extremists. It's easy to point our fingers at those who shout the loudest, those who represent the remote poles of these debates and discussions, on the far left and the far right. But tonight, in the spirit of Yom Kippur, in the spirit of introspection, I confess that I'm not sure that I'm not just as much to blame as they are. I stood silent. Al chet shechatati lefanecha, through silence. I'm guilty of the sin I committed by omission. I had an opportunity to spotlight a middle ground, but I took the easy path and I remained quiet rather than speaking up. And instead, by keeping that middle ground quiet, I let the other voices on the extremes get louder. And tonight I'm wondering if I'm not alone in this. I'm wondering if our society really is as fractured as it seems that it is. I wonder if most people really do live on these extremes of the far left and the far right. or if most people are in the middle, but are afraid to speak out, afraid to speak up, because we get labeled so quickly. All or nothing. That's the dichotomy that we've created for ourselves. You can pick nearly any political topic, not just Zionism. Immigration, gun control, abortion, euthanasia, social assistance, lockdowns, vaccines. And the moment anyone tries to have a nuanced conversation, they agree with 70, 80, 90% of what people are saying. But they start to suggest something different. We seem to shout them down. We have no room for disagreement. We have no room for complex issues to be discussed fully and totally. It's all or nothing. So that's my question tonight. Am I alone in this? Or are there others who are guilty of being silent? Guilty of letting our society get to this extreme because we don't give voice to that middle ground, to the nuance. The people on the right and the left, the people on the far poles don't have to shout any louder if the rest of us simply remain quiet. So when we strike our hearts today, when we think about the sins that we've committed, wants to think about the sins we've done through omission, the times we've let the middle ground, the place where we can come together, where we can build those relationships, where we can have hope for a future. We've let that middle space slip past us. Zionism is not one simple idea. It's over 100 years old. It's really over 2 millennia old. Our right and our promise and our vision and our hope of returning to our land. But what that land looks like, how it exists, how it relates to others, there's a lot of room for conversation. Where there's not room is the right of Jews to live in the land of Israel in peace. But all of our topics, we need to bring back that space. Room to have those discussions. Have you ever wondered why we fast for 25 hours on Yom Kippur, not 24? Or why Shabbat starts before the sun fully comes down, but it doesn't end until after the 3 stars are up in the sky? Again, not a full regular day, not 24 hours, but 25. The reason is out of concern, because the time between when sundown happens and when the stars come out, the rabbis aren't sure which day it is. Twilight, or in Hebrew, Bein Hashmashot. They're not sure, is it last night, is it yesterday, or is it today? So we count that day on both ends of the spectrum, giving us these 25-hour holidays. We want things to be simple. We want them to be clear. This is where one day ends. This is where the next day begins. But the truth is, the new day, the future, is born out of that place of uncertainty. And maybe if we can tolerate a little more uncertainty, a little more nuance, a little more complexity, maybe that's the place where we can find a future for tomorrow that we want to build.